Hello and welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce Presents Afternoon Tea With. And this, by the way, is our new series of short interviews with prominent influencers and decision makers in the EU and the UK. This afternoon, we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Daniel Dalton, the new CEO of the Chamber. Good afternoon, Dan. Thanks for joining us for a chat over afternoon tea.
Good afternoon. I hope you're well.
Very good. Oh, what was that on your mug, Daniel?
Well, it just says here, in case of emergency, ask Daniel. My kids got it for me, so it makes the tea taste well, anyway.
Very good. So you're clearly used to handling emergencies.
Well, yes, very much so over the last few years.
Well, so speaking of which, as new CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce, EU and Belgium, can you explain to us what's the traditional role of a Chamber of Commerce? And then specifically, of course, how has that changed since Brexit?
Well, a traditional role would be representing the views and the interests of the businesses in whatever sort of jurisdiction you're in. For the British Chamber in Belgium, that's always been the role, trying to represent the businesses and trying to facilitate trade both ways, really, from UK companies coming into Belgium and Belgian companies going into the UK. The British Chamber of Commerce in Belgium and the EU is also slightly different from all the other chambers because we also have a sort of EU policy side of it, which is a very big part of the British Chamber here, which looks a lot at the policy, debates the policies, has meetings with prominent legislators and policymakers in Brussels, and generally puts on a lot of events. And I think the British Chamber here, that's really what we've been focused on traditionally over the last few years, is putting on good, high quality events, allowing people to network within the organisation that we've built up.
And who would be sort of the target people for these events? Who are the kind of people that come to those events?
So, it will be businesses that have an interest either in networking with other businesses, trying to make contacts that way, or those that really are interested in the decision-making process, either in the European Union or in Belgium, because we also do events from the Belgian side with Belgian policymakers. So really the idea of these events is to build a bit of a network, build a bit of information, allow people to start passing ideas across, and from the British Chamber to influence a little bit maybe what is happening in those policy debates.
And so speaking of policy debates, if that's sort of more the traditional role, what's been happening now since Brexit?
Well, Brexit has been a real challenge, as you can imagine, for the British Chamber. And we've had to sort of change our role a little bit from what we used to do, because we have the EU side and the EU committee side we have, which does a lot of single market law, if you like. That's been really one of the big focuses of the Chamber over the last 10, 15 years. So now the UK is going to be a third country. We need to adapt that slightly, because that is still really important. I mean, British companies that are coming into the European Union still need to understand what the single market rules are, to influence them where possible. And that's going to be much harder now, of course, given the fact that the UK doesn't have representation in terms of MEPs or commissioners in Brussels. So actually the British Chamber now is going to be one of the big British organisations that maybe can give the voice of British interests and British businesses in Brussels. So I think that's part of it. The second part is we're trying to obviously change a little bit, reflective to the new relationship that the UK and the EU are going to have, because the UK, is still a key investor in Europe. It's the biggest single direct investor in the European Union. 300 billion pounds worth of goods and services have been exported from the UK to the EU last year alone. So there's a huge sort of trade relationship that we need to work on, and we see the Chamber moulding very much into a lot more work on that trade relationship. And that will also, I think, has resonance not just between the UK-EU trade relationship, but also the trade relationship generally that the EU has with third countries. And there are some issues like market access problems, technical barriers to trade, they call them in trade terms, that I think we can work on a little bit of a chamber, and because we know the European Union very well, because the UK was a member for 40 years, we're still very close, our economies are still very closely entwined. And that relationship is going to continue both ways, EU companies going to the UK and UK companies going to the EU for forever, hopefully. So that's where our role will change and mold a little bit in the years to come after Brexit.
So while I guess stepping out of the EU, because we were in the EU, that the UK was in the EU, it's the connections are still there. In fact, I think you were an MEP yourself, weren't you, Dan?
That's right. Yeah, I was an MEP, and I was an MEP on the Internal Market Committee. So that really was the committee that that drives EU law. And I think one of the key things here with that is the British Chamber in Belgium is actually really well placed to help British companies that are coming into Europe try dip their feet in the single market in Belgium, because we have all the Belgium expertise as well we can help you with and we can put you in contact with, and then use that as your base to spread around the single market because of the EU competence that we have. And that's a big role, and I see that very much from the work I did in the Internal Market Committee. I can see the challenges already that British businesses have coming into Europe, even when the UK was in the EU. So I think there's a huge role there, and there's a huge potential to build on some of that experience.
So becoming the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce, EU and Belgium during the time of Brexit, obviously a challenge, but now we kind of have this other dynamic, this new normal due to the time of pandemic. How has that changed the British business and their thoughts of physically coming to Europe? Are they still coming?
Trade is still happening. I mean, it's difficult right now because, of course, for a long time, borders were effectively closed. Both Belgium and the UK were under quite strong lockdown. So that obviously impacts trade. Now we're beginning to open up and hopefully the lockdowns are beginning to be eased, and that will be a permanent fixture, we hope. There's nothing that happened during the coronavirus that would break off that trade fully. It was a temporary stop. Those links are still there. And we hope very much that we'll be able to see those links building back up, which is also why an agreement on Brexit is very important at the end of the year, because that does have potential to break those links. So we're hopeful that in the long term, in terms of trade bilaterally, coronavirus will be a dip rather than a long-term sort of problem. The challenge, of course, is businesses everywhere. Coronavirus has fundamentally upended the way they work, and we've been doing quite a lot of work in trying to inform businesses of what's available to them from governments. And to be fair, the British government and the Belgian government and the EU have all put forward quite strong packages to help businesses through the immediate problems, and we're certainly working very much on trying to develop that. The challenge, of course, is where does the economy go in the next year after this, and this is something that we're very worried about, and that's very important. I think if you see particularly the EU reaction with the next generation EU program they're talking about, which is this big 750 billion euro fund that's hopefully going to try and reinvigorate the economy in Europe. We want to be involved in the debate about that, because that's you're positive in one way, but also there's real dangers of money being put into areas that might not be beneficial for the economy as a whole, or certain sectors might be funded in such a way that makes it harder for other companies to come into those sectors. So we're a little bit concerned about that, and we want to be part of that debate. But overall, the British Chamber has a real role to play right now, I think more than ever, given the fact that the link between governments and businesses now is much more than we've seen before. I mean, and one other point I would say is many of our members have pivoted to producing things to help with the coronavirus lockdown, whether that is things like moving from producing alcohol to making hand sanitizers, or producing face masks or things like this. I mean, business community everywhere has really responded and pivoted to try and make sure that we're alleviating the worst of the pandemic. And particularly in the healthcare sector, they're looking at vaccines now, which hopefully will provide us the full-time route out of this.
Yeah. So as representative of the British Chamber, is there one message that you'd like to offer to our viewers? And I guess that's two-sided, isn't it? Is there a message you'd like to offer British businesses that are considering their future relationship with Europe? And then, of course, on the flip side, do you have a message for European companies and their future business relationship with British companies?
Yeah, it's very much. I mean, the first message would be the same to both of them, i.e., Britain is still open for business. British businesses are still going to be investing in Europe. This economic relationship that we've built will remain strong on both sides. And we as the British Chamber can be that bridge between the two sides. So for British companies that want to come into Europe, but also, and very importantly, for European companies that want to understand how the UK government is dealing with this, and for them to get into the UK. And we see ourselves very much as the bridge for that. For British businesses, as I mentioned earlier, there's much less representation here in Brussels now. And given the fact that we have both the policy experience and expertise, and also the links with Belgian companies and Belgian authorities, and the things you really need to know and be put in contact with to set up here and develop here, we can be that bridge, and we can, you should be looking to come to us if you're going to be working in Europe. And for the European companies coming the other way, we again can be the facilitator of that. We have very close relationships with the authorities in the UK and with the British chambers, around the different regions of the UK. So I think the message we would give as a chamber is that we're this bridge, and we are European. We've been here for many years. We have many European companies who are members, and we want to make sure that business relationship stays strong, because it's in the interests of not just business but consumers on both sides of the channel, and also, the long-term relationship that the UK and the EU will have in the future.
Excellent. So business on both sides definitely have a place to come to look for that continued network leading into Europe or the UK. That's fantastic. Dan, thank you very, very much for joining us, and I hope to see you very, very soon.
Thank you. Likewise, and good luck with the series.